Hello, my name is Jocelyn Wong. I am the Director of Community Engagement here at the Nantucket Historical Association. Thank you all for joining the NHA this evening for our exhibition lecture series. Today we will hear from Rebecca Tolley, educator, artist, lifelong learner, and our 2025 Verney Research Fellow. This evening, Rebecca will talk about how mid-century needlework courses bridged leisure and labor, revealing how embroidery functioned as both an expressive art form as well as a pathway to economic empowerment. Drawing from archival collections including Mary Ann Beinecke's collection, as well as the Nantucket School of Needlery, the lecture today will examine how such programs reflect larger questions of gender, class, and access. She will also bring to light the regional influence of Massachusetts and New York educators, such as Mary Ann Beinecke, Erica Wilson, and Nellie Bergh, in shaping national craft education. So a little bit of background about our speaker. Rebecca Tolley is a professor and academic librarian at East Tennessee State University. She regularly teaches and studies improvisational quilt making at Shakti in the Mountains, a women's community center in Johnson City, Tennessee. Rebecca received a South Arts Emerging Traditional Artists Fellowship, which provided her with the opportunity to deepen her knowledge of quilt making by studying with Gee's Bend Quilts in Alabama. Through the Folk Life Institute at the Tennessee Arts Commission, she facilitated Stitching Through Storms, Quilts of Resilience and Recovery, a community quilt block project that memorializes the impact of Hurricane Helene on Northeast Tennessee communities. Her current research explores the overlooked history of mid-century embroidery correspondence courses, particularly their cultural, educational, and economic significance. So please join me in welcoming Rebecca Tolley.
Lovely to see so many of you here tonight. First I want to thank everyone at the NHA for making me feel very welcome and comfortable, for connecting me with people and resources so that I can answer all of the questions that I have about correspondence courses in mid-century America. So before we start, I'd like to speak a little bit about me and how I came to this topic, so that I feel like as a researcher, often we're really influenced by things in our background or childhood that we don't realize till later. And so this is one example of that for me. But briefly, I'm going to tell you, give you a little information about my experience with correspondence courses. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Nellie Bergh, who I discovered last year, who created a correspondence course, embroidery correspondence course. I have a lot of research questions, so I'll kind of share those with you as well. I'll talk to you a little bit about my approach to answering those questions prior to coming to the NHA. And then also, I've been here 2 days, so I haven't had a great deal of time to get into the meat of all the collections that I'm looking at. And then I have some quick summaries of things happening in Nantucket in the 60s and 70s that really created this economic revitalization and sort of this craft revival. So people like Mary Ann Beinecke, Erica Wilson, and then entities like Nantucket Looms and the Nantucket Needle Women. I'll just briefly talk about those. I assume that some of you know a lot more about those topics than I do, so I don't want to preach to the choir. But anyway, so that's sort of where we're going. And we'll have time for questions afterwards. So if you would wait and ask questions, and I have some questions for you too. if you'll wait till the end, and there will be a microphone passed around so that everyone can hear the questions that are asked. So when I speak about textiles, one of the things that I mention is that 5 women in my family were garment workers. And so, this is what they did for a living, piecework. They made clothing. And so only 2 of those women spent their leisure time embroidering or doing applique or quilt making. That was my mother and my maternal grandmother. And so that for me is just really intriguing because I don't know, a lot of us do work that we are paid for that we don't necessarily enjoy. And then, in our leisure time, we do things we enjoy. But at least in the case of my mother and grandmother, they both sort of continued or had an abiding interest in needlework. So let me go to the next slide. So my childhood fuels my research, and I'm from East Tennessee. That could be Southern or Central Appalachia is how we pronounce it there. I think you all pronounce it Appalachia up here. And I spent a lot of time with my grandparents, and they were like on 2 opposite poles. Like my maternal grandparents smoked cigarettes. They drank, they played cards, they introduced me to gambling. I learned to play rummy when I was, 6. And then my paternal grandparents were very religious Free Will Baptists who were teetotalers. They didn't have a TV. And so I sort of had this, childhood where there were these oppositional forces, and it's like, how should I be in the world when I have these 2 examples? But the paternal grandparents, who were very religious, didn't have a TV. We listened to a lot of AM radio, and this was like AM gospel radio with preaching and singing, and that's what we did for entertainment. And sometimes we'd play bingo, but no TV. So this AM station, I don't remember what it was called, they had some sort of Bible education correspondence course. And I was like, oh, I'll do that. I always like to write letters. So I thought correspondence courses would be fun. And so I did the correspondence course. They would send me a lesson, and then I would return it, and then they would send me back another lesson, and then they would send me a bookmark that was tatted or crocheted, so like a cross. And so I think I still have one of those somewhere. So that was my experience with correspondence courses and listening to the radio and that education by mail. One of the other sort of guiding lights for me has been to always be learning. As Jocelyn said, I'm a lifetime learner. I'm an academic librarian. And one of the things that I am constantly doing is learning new skills as far as I've knitted for a long time. I've quilted for a long time too. Trying to think. I am in the middle of an embroidery, sorry. Yes, I have embroidery projects, but upholstery. I'm learning to do upholstery. I learned to make like a woven footstool. I just like to learn. And I think part of it is that I have adult diagnosed ADHD. And so it's like, just keep the fires burning, always be learning new techniques. And so my experience with that has been that I take a lot of online courses with, painters or embroiderers or quilters. And I don't know if you all have experienced this or not, but there are lots of people who are producing content, for pay content on how to use Coca-Cola to make like a print. It's aluminum foil and Coca-Cola, and you can make a print with that. Somehow the chemicals work that way. But so that experience of like correspondence courses in the past and then this current like online education that we can sort of access at a moment's notice. Those are some of the forces that have kind of put me on this path. And then, as Jocelyn also mentioned, I was an emerging traditional artist, received a grant with South Arts. And so one of the things that we did, my cohort, was we went to Aramont, which is in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. It is a arts and crafts school. And we went there for like a weekend. And while we were there was a show that their guest curator put together, Megan Adams. So she put together this show called Crafting a Collection, the art collections of artist collectors, Nellie Bergh, Jerry Drown, and Bill Griffith. So Nellie Bergh is who sort of was my entree into this. And this image is a slide of part of the exhibit, and it shows these binders on a table, and these are embroidery course binders that she came up with to share for embroidery via correspondence course. So I'll tell you a little bit about her. So Nellie Torrance Bergh, 1913 to 1995. One of the most fascinating things about her, well, I mean, she kind of did a lot of things, but she didn't start embroidering until she was 50. But before that, she studied art and home ec at Ohio University and the Teachers College at Columbia University. She taught clothing design and construction at Skidmore, taught at Pratt, in the 40s. And then in the 60s, I'm thinking 67 or 68, the trouble is I can't pinpoint these exact dates, she established this correspondence course for the National Standards Council of American Embroiderers, which is sort of a precursor to the two organizations that we have today that are operational, the Embroiderers Guild of America and the National Academy of Needle Arts. So she lived in Little Neck Bay, Long Island, and I found information about her in newspapers, like when she went and when she taught somewhere, in Pennsylvania or in the Midwest. So in 1996, her estate was bequested to Aramont in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. So they received those correspondence course notebooks, and they received some of the textile embroidery work she created, and then she was a collector. So there were pieces from other artists as well. So the next couple slides I'll go through pretty quickly, and I'm just going to show you some of what was in those binders. I spent some time at Aramont during my South Arts cohort days, but then I ended up going back a couple months later to spend time with all of these notebooks, these binders. So this is a sample of one of the embroidery works that was in the binders, and this is just nautical fish. On the next slide is this is a newspaper article photocopy of when this collection was donated to Aramont, and then this next image is her instructions for whipped and woven spider web from the correspondence course notebooks. And so Nellie Bergh had two daughters who predeceased her, and so I'm sort of at a stopping point as far as finding out more information about the correspondence course and how that operated. I have some other names to investigate and to try and find more and gather more information about how it all worked, how successful it was, who was the intended audience. And so I have those questions about her program. But then I have a lot of questions just in general about her programs, also about the others that I mentioned concerning education and pedagogy, gender and domestic ideology, labor class and entrepreneurship, race, ethnicity, class, access, craft, material, culture, and embodied knowledge, and then also the cultural legacy and contemporary relevance of correspondence courses for us. The next two slides I have are just examples of the kind of questions that I have and that I want to answer. I don't know that you can read them, so I will read them out to you or read a few of them so that you can see what my questions are. So how did embroidery correspondence courses function as alternative or supplementary forms of vocational and artistic education in mid-century America? How did the structure of self-paced I'm having pronunciation problems. Self-paced mail-order embroidery courses anticipate or influence later models of distance learning, including online education, which is the environment we find ourselves in today? How did they reinforce or challenge post-war ideals of femininity, domesticity, and womanhood? What kinds of gendered language, imagery, and values were embedded in course advertisements, instructional materials, and student-instructor correspondence, so that instructor-student correspondence is what I'm really hoping to find while I'm at the NHA. And then another question, who were the intended and actual audiences for embroidery correspondence courses? How were race, ethnicity, and immigration status addressed or eluded? So more examples of my questions. What types of embroidery motifs, techniques, and styles were taught, and how do they reflect or depart from traditional or regional craft histories? What can the physical artifacts produced tell us about the transmission of material and emotional knowledge? In what ways can the study of these programs inform current conversations in feminist craft studies, do-it-yourself culture, and the resurgence of interest in analog making practices? And then last question, how might these courses serve as an archival window into overlooked histories of women's labor, creativity, and adaptation in the face of structural limits? So next, I'll talk to you a little bit about my approach. I have been doing a lot of primary research in newspapers.com after I finished up with what I could find about Nellie Bergh. I'm primary research in embroidery books, looking at who the authors were, what books were reviewed in newspapers and magazines, who those instructors were or authors were, so that I can gain a sense of, I guess who the heavy players in embroidery were. And then secondary research in embroidery textiles and fiber, critical studies in those areas. And also secondary research in art and craft at mid-century in the United States, just so that I have some background and context. And then, of course, my primary research here at the Nantucket Historical Association. So my focus so far has been looking through the materials related to Mary Ann Beinecke. And if you, so I'll share this, you may know, you may not know. She hoped that the nonprofit home study course would spark little embroidery groups being founded all over the United States, which would straighten out confusing embroidery terminology. If you know about embroidery terminology, it varies from region to region, from country to country, from time and place. She had these needlery ventures, so the needlery school, cloth shop, hand weaving projects. She founded the school to establish standards for judging needlery teachers. And it took 3 years to test and write the course. She had a regular newsletter that she sent by mail to those enrolled, the traveling needle, and this kept embroiderers in touch with each other in their areas. And one of the quotes that that I listed here, which you may or may not be able to read, is she says, "I'm thinking that one thing we should really start on this island is a school of bindery. But my real dream is to start a correspondence school of weaving," she says, her eyes sparkling. So this is from a Goldsboro News Argus newspaper article. Embroidery is for the young. So I think one of the things that Mary Ann and Erica Wilson tried to do with embroidery was to dismantle, I guess, the stereotypes that we have of embroidery as for grannies, which I think grannies are wonderful. But when you look at, or when you see things about embroidery, it's usually old-fashioned, fusty grannies, not something that like the young, hip kids are into. But there was a series of articles in newspapers in the late 60s that really were pushing, this is a new, like the teenagers are really, really into it. So, and then we have Erica Wilson, also known as the First Lady of Embroidery. She was British born, an embroidery artist from 1928 to 2011. She studied at the Royal School of Needlework, and that's one of the things that I'm discovering, or that I sort of assumed, was that in the United States we have sort of inherited our embroidery traditions from the Royal School of Needlework and also from the Embroiderers Guild of England. And then, you know, we had chapters start opening in Boston and in Tulsa and in, you know, different places all over the country. So Erica popularized embroidery through TVs, books, and kits. And she's most of the information I have learned from her or learned about her is from a book that came out a couple years ago, published by the Winterthur Museum. And I met her daughter Vanessa last night, and a lot of her papers have been taken or are at Winterthur, but they haven't been processed because I think the person responsible for the collection died, and so no one has taken on that. So I'm sort of at a you know, another one of those. It feels like another dead end because I have to wait for these papers to be processed so I can kind of look and see, you know, correspondence course, because Erica Wilson is also credited with starting home study correspondence courses. She hosted a PBS show, Erica, from 1971 to 1972. She brought needlework to mass audiences, and this was in Boston at WGHB, I think that's right. She was right next door to Julia Child in the studio, and so Erica oftentimes has been called the Julia Child of embroidery. So, but she launched retail kits, mail order stores. She did tours to Scotland and England and China. She would, you know, at which a lot of contemporary quilt makers that I know, Heidi Parks, for example, she takes people to Japan on quilt making tours. So Erica was doing all this, you know, back in the 60s and 70s, you know, 40, 50 years ago, before we have sort of a repeat or a parallelism of people doing that as well. So one of the things that's really fascinating about Erica is, I guess she was considered a rebel because the Embroiderers Guild in in England, they were upset with her because she departed from like this rigid classroom instruction. She would host classes in her home in New York, also here in Nantucket. She opened up her house, and people would come through, and they would, they would learn stump work or whatever was on the docket for that day. So one of the things that she also did is she really kind of made embroidery hip again. Her use of color and her use of more contemporary motifs really sort of brought embroidery out of that colonial, I guess, and that was part of what Mary Ann Beinecke was trying to do with the Nantucket Needle Women and Nantucket Looms, was when they were restoring the Jared Coffin House. They wanted to produce all of the textiles on the island, so they were like, let's set up looms, let's weave linen, and then we'll train the local women how to do the embroidery work. And so that moves us into the Nantucket Needlewomen part. So Erica Wilson was one of the first teachers to come to Nantucket to teach local women embroidery work. So 1960. And this was Nantucket Needlewomen was supported, funded by the Nantucket Historical Trust, which Mary Ann Beinecke and her husband, Walter Beinecke Jr., were involved in creating and preserving the Nantucket that we know today. So the Nantucket School of Needlery was established in 1968. And so between like this revitalization of the Jared Coffin House is really what created this sort of craft movement in Nantucket in the 60s and 70s. And then today, I visited Nantucket Looms today. It's still in business, and their sign over the door says established in whatever year. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I should talk about Nantucket Needlewomen. So the Nantucket Needlewomen came together. There were 12 and sometimes 22 women who learned how to do crewel embroidery so that they could replicate draperies and bedspreads, bed coverings for the Jared Coffin House. And then after that, they remained together to teach needlework to people who would come to the island to learn. So people could come and learn different classes every summer. There were, I haven't really seen a schedule yet because I'm not that far in my research, but they invited people to Nantucket experts in embroidery so that everyone could learn from them. And then we have Nantucket Looms, founded in 1968 by Andy Oates and William Mueller. The weaving studio focused on hand-woven textiles in the New England tradition. And they had local artisans who were trained in weaving and spinning and dyeing. And they collaborated with the Nantucket School of Needlery, fostering this vibrant textile arts community. So 2 or 3 more slides, and then we'll get to your questions and my questions. So in the last 2 days, what I learned, because one of the things that I've wondered is who was really first, because I thought for some reason that Nellie Bergh, that her program, her correspondence course in 67, 68 was first, but actually what I learned was Erica Wilson established her home learning In 1959, needleworkers in Williamsburg, Virginia, asked her for advice about embroidery work for reenactment purposes. So, colonial or historic Williamsburg, and Erica's husband, she was overcommitted, had too much going on, and he didn't think she had time to go down to Williamsburg. So he said, you should correspond with them. So this was a correspondence course, probably not as formalized as what Mary Ann Beinecke came up with a little bit later. So her home study course, Mary Ann Beinecke's, was established in 68 or 69. It was certified by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and she worked with Laros Printing Company of Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, in April of 1973 to have course materials published for home study. So the home study course was always in the back of her mind, but it looks like I haven't found anything earlier than 73 to indicate printed materials. So that's the date I'm going with until I find something, from 69 that says she produced these kinds of things. So one of the other questions that I had answered today or yesterday was that Mary Ann Beinecke's objective in creating the Needle Women of Nantucket and the Nantucket Looms was creating economic opportunities for local Nantucket women during off-season when the island had a few year-round jobs. And so teaching them how to be, expert embroiderers and then teachers, she felt like this was a viable economic solution for them. And this has been something that many women in different regions have done for years to make a little extra money by doing some piecework or handwork, so that they have pin money or so that they can, put food on the table. So that is sort of where I am with my research. I have my question for you is, who should I talk to? I'm still looking through the documents to identify people who were involved in the learning embroidery, teaching embroidery in the looms as well. And so if you all have suggestions for who I should talk to, so you're pointing out, is this Miss Gilbert or Miss Boardman? Or someone else completely? Because I have some names of people that I need to follow up with. But yes, so please feel free to connect with me now or connect with me afterwards. But I'm also eager to hear what questions you might have, and my answer might be, I don't know yet, but I'm okay with that. So we'll open the floor to questions, and there's a microphone over to this side.
Hi, thank you. Really interesting. I know you're very early in your research, but is there anything that's surprised you so far?
At least with Mary Ann Beinecke's, it is so thorough. She has 35 different sections in this correspondence course. And I think when I embroider, I probably use 3 or 4 different stitches. I don't do anything really elaborate, but so that was really surprising. And compared to the materials that I've seen in what Nellie Bergh created, hers was like more condensed. So just so it's just like an encyclopedia of I think the people who completed the Beinecke home study extension course would have been experts, just walking encyclopedias of embroidery, and that just sort of boggles my mind. Thank you for your question. Yes, Elizabeth Gilbert's name has come up. This woman just said, if I haven't heard, then the person I need to talk to is Elizabeth Gilbert.
And I was wondering about Elizabeth Gilbert as well. And for some reason, I was thinking there may still be some of these Nantucket needlework women around, because my aunt was one of the first weavers at the cloth company of Nantucket before the Nantucket looms with. So I'm feeling like there still was Elizabeth Gilbert. Did she come out of that Nantucket needlework? She did. So she's your point person. That's who I was thinking of.
Thank you.
She was involved in it then. So she's your girl. And I'm sure she would know who's still around as well, so you could get firsthand accounts
Wonderful, thank
of
you.
that. Yeah.
You should talk to my aunt, maybe later, but the living history is right here. I'm a niece, and I remember as a teenager going with friends of mine to Erica Wilson's and finding some really cool patterns. And they would make belts for their parents, or they would make other cool things that she had produced in her kits. But this one sat, worked, beloved friend. They're still alive, and they're here willing to share, I'm sure.
There aren't many, because most of the women that I worked with were appreciably older than I. I can probably come up with some of their names, but it's very possible that their children or their daughters or sons may even have some of the correspondence courses that never interested me. But certainly, being a New Yorker, I had the chance to go to her office, her atelier on Madison Avenue, because the shop here in the early years always operated only in the red. And Vladimir Kagan insisted that it was a lost leader, but it was worth every instance of publicity, because so many people passed through Nantucket during the summer with homes in Palm Beach, and you name it, that's where they lived otherwise. And they could bring back kits and so on. Most of the kits had a particular attitude. They taught particular stitches. It wasn't like taking this stitch and then that stitch. It was always a small addition that was new, and that's how they got through the library of stitches. They had to make up names for stitches, yes.
Well, that sounds
That
fun.
made Erica and Bloody rebels, because the stuffiness of the English guild and so on was not something that was comfortable to live with, because if you didn't start from the left as a righty or the right as a lefty, you were totally lost. And they didn't care in which direction you worked, as long as the piece itself was uniform.
That's wonderful. That also reminds me, another surprising thing, to go back to your question, is that Erica, as I said, she was not as formal as where she learned, and so she thought it was okay if you left a long tail on the back of your embroidery, which was, don't do that. And she also felt like you didn't always have to have a hoop. You could just stitch things free-handed, and those two things were like, the rules of embroidery are you must do it this way and you must have a hoop. And so, she was just, and I think that her approach made it super accessible to lots of people who are afraid of, I'm not doing this right. And if you don't do it right the first time, then you might quit and just give it up. But I think her approach was very, just sort of informal and encouraging.
Have you been to the Sconset Chapel yet?
No, I have not.
I'll be the docent there on Monday morning.
Okay, wonderful.
You're welcome to come between 10 and 12, and I'm sure there are ways that the chapel can be open to you. There are, as you must know, a couple of hundred kneelers that were designed by Erica Wilson and worked by members of that community. They're all identified, labeled, cataloged, And it will be, I think, great fun for you.
I agree. Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. I had asked Matthew the other day about going to the Jared Coffin House because I've been reading so much about all of the production, all the textiles, all the crewel work, and I wanted to see it. But he tells me, it's a hotel. And then I've also read in the papers that a lot of the original things that were created for the coffin house were stolen because people liked the stuff. And so they ended up putting reproductions like furniture in, I guess it's a hotel now, and actually would screw things down so people couldn't make off with them. So,
So I'm curious about the correspondence aspect of your research, and what do you think gave rise? Was it just with the arts and crafts movement, or was there a general increase in correspondence classes, and did it somehow have something to do with the exodus to the suburbs after the Second World War? Or I'm just curious about that aspect of it.
I'm curious too as well. Historically, a lot of women learned embroidery as part of their education. If you were, a woman of means, then part of your education was in the gentle arts. So you might learn French and you might learn embroidery. This is talking more 19th century. And so at some point there was, I think when women started going to public schools, that sort of education in needlework or domestic arts fell away because it wasn't part of the public school curriculum. Although I do remember in the early 80s when I was in middle school, that's when I learned embroidery and I learned candle wicking. So at that point, I think it was still, but I haven't really looked at the curriculum in public schools, but I think that is part of because I think there was maybe some informal embroidery happening, of course, but the American chapter of the Embroiderers Guild, I don't think was formed in the United States till 1958, maybe. So this is or it might have been, it's 47 or 58. So I'm sorry, I'm not that good with dates. But so I think there was this gap in education, or there's just a lot of, hidden histories that hasn't been documented.
Correspondence courses, did they deal primarily with embroidery for, say, utilitarian objects, quilts, clothing, things like that, or did they extend it into the incorporation of traditional stitches into art? Say the work of Alma Lesh, for example, where she take found objects and combine them using very traditional stitches. Do the correspondence courses go beyond just dealing with the creation?
That's an excellent question. What I know this far is that I'm trying to think. I know that Mary Ann Beinecke, from what I've read in the materials, she felt like people who were doing this work were artists. And she wanted to elevate embroidery to an art form instead of, people considering it a craft. But I think that it was, she wanted to provide this basis from which you could start and maybe get your feet wet in some traditional sampler kind of activities. I think that's what it looked like so far that I've seen is creating some sort of a sampler piece and sending it through mail to your teacher, and then the teacher looking at it, critiquing it, evaluating it. And then because the purpose of the home study especially was so that you could get a certificate and be a certified embroidery teacher, and so I think it was probably meant more to be an economic boost for someone, not necessarily. I mean, I think it would be great if they went into more artistic things, but I think it was just sort of, here is a way to make money, teaching adult education classes.
Have the found object in your home. This would extend the boundaries beyond just embroidery aprons.
Exactly.
So I just wanted to throw in a quick comment because we're really thrilled that Rebecca's here to do this research. The NHA has been really working over the last few years to expand the representation in our collections of this craft revival that started in the 60s here on Nantucket. We've done a lot of collecting around the early history of the cloth company and the looms. We've done intentional collecting around this correspondence course and the Nantucket Needlewomen, particularly with the help of Suzanne Gardner and Mary Ann Beinecke's daughter, Julie Beinecke Stackpole, who provided a lot of the material that you're actually looking at. And we've had scholars working on the looms quite assiduously and their early history, and some of that's been published. And we're really excited to have you now looking in depth at the correspondence course and the Needlewomen to try and improve our understanding of that as well, because as amply demonstrated by the people here in this audience, there's a living tradition of this that is still resonating here on Nantucket, that we want to make sure that we are explaining well to people from off island who are coming to visit us. As we like to say at the NHA, we're about a lot more than whales, and this is definitely part of that story. So thank you very much for coming and diving into this with us.
Yes, of course. Thank you.
Correspondence courses kind of seem like they're the predecessor to remote learning. And as remote learning has really taken a new platform in social media and YouTube videos and all those sort of mediums, do you feel like specific elements of embroidery or other needle arts will struggle to have masters within them, as there are so many options to learn these days, as opposed to specific 35-step correspondence courses and things like that?
That's a great question. And I think there is a lot of competition out there. I mean, lots of people just put up content on YouTube, how to do backstitch. And so I think there are opportunities for probably really savvy people. Like if we had this generation's Erica Wilson, who, she did mail order, she did television, she did tours, she had retail stores. And I think I think it probably comes down to the approach of the teacher, maybe almost more like a cult of personality kind of thing, because we have influencers on social media and they have followers. So I think if someone was producing really great work, like I see a lot of artists who are doing embroidery work and I follow their Instagram and it's really fascinating. I would love to take a class with them to sort of learn their approach and their technique. And so I think there is room for that. But I'm not an expert in like influencing and building, followers and communities, but I think it is possible. And I think I really applaud Mary Ann Beinecke and Erica Wilson for doing it the old-fashioned way. But one of the things that I found was a list of people to send invitations to for some sort of a party that had to do with it was the looms or one of her projects. So I mean, you definitely had like PR going on in the 50s and 60s. And it was, just the old-fashioned way of doing it, I guess, by phone or placing a newspaper advertisement instead of the way that we can disseminate information so quickly today.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Rebecca, for that. I think we're all looking forward to seeing how your research progresses over the next 3 weeks of your stay on Nantucket. So I just wanted to announce that our next lecture will take place next Wednesday, July 2nd at Greater Light at 4:30. And it will feature Nantucket summer resident Diana Waymar, creator and curator of the Interwoven Stories community-based narrative stitching project. She spearheaded this Interwoven Stories project in cities around the world, including Damascus, Syria, Victoria, British Columbia, San Francisco, and Nantucket in 2018. So some of you may recall that project. She will actually be bringing over those stitched pages from the 2018 Nantucket project, and we will have a reinstallation of those pages at Greater Light from Wednesday to Saturday of next week on view. So please go and take a look at that and join us for the talk at Greater Light next Wednesday at 4:30. And I just want to thank all of our NHA members and patrons for making these exhibition lecture series possible. And thank you to all of you for joining us this evening. Thank you, Rebecca, again, for sharing your research with us and traveling to Nantucket to be with us this evening.